Packers fans out here to stay. Cheeseheads green and gold all day. Jordan Love lead us to the bay. Every game we find a way. Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for OPE, let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for OPE, you know. Green and gold gonna glow. Lambeau Field, our sacred ground. Feel the vibe, hear the sound. Packers fans so loud and proud. Jordan Love, he's wearing the crown. Lambeau Field, our sacred ground. Feel the vibe, hear the sound. Packers fans so loud and proud. Jordan Love, he's wearing the crown.
And welcome to another episode of the Ohana Packers Edition podcast. We are OPE. I am Iowa Joe. This is episode 4 of my OPE Unscripted, where I bring on random people and just have conversations on whatever pops up. This week is a very special one. This one has been in works for the last year and a half or so. I am kind of geeking out on this because I have listened to this podcast since the inception. I am joined by the host of Our Fake History, Sebastian Major. Sebastian, thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here.
So, Our Fake History, like I said, I've been listening since season 1. Can you give our listeners, since we're kind of meatheads and sports people, kind of a rundown of what you do with Our Fake History?
Sure. So, Our Fake History looks at historical myths. So these are legends or misconceptions that have been wrapped into how we talk about our history. So sometimes I'm looking at, stories that get told again and again and again, that get passed off as real history that probably are not true. Sometimes I look at figures that everyone assumes are entirely legendary, like Robin Hood or King Arthur, or, take your pick of any sort of folklore figure. And then I look at whether or not there's a kernel of historical truth at the heart of those tales. And then I've also really gotten into famous fakes. So frauds, hoaxes, imposters. So people in history that sort of made a name for themselves as liars. So I'm really sort of fascinated by the way that we construct our history, how weird legends become part of our history, and how we can sort fact from fiction. So the tagline for the show, I say it at the beginning of every show, is it's the podcast where we explore historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story it simply must be told. So that's what I'm doing.
Right, and you talk about how recently you've been trying to do like fakes and stuff like that. Your most recent episode was the Dreadnought episode from Great Britain, and I really appreciate the deep dive you did on that one. I had never heard of it myself, and so that was one of those parts of history that you do that it's like, okay, I've never heard of this, but now you've got my interest piqued, and I thought you did a really good job of kind of like Virginia Woolf is. I don't want to spoil the episode for anybody if they haven't heard it, but Virginia Woolf was the center point of the episode, and I thought you did a really good job saying, yes, this person did great things, later on in life, but we also can't just shove aside some things that may have happened with them that maybe weren't so great.
Yeah.
So and that's not the first time you've done it, and I think that's why I've really been drawn to your podcast is you don't pull your punches on anything. You do say, yeah, these are great things, this, but we also got to look at this part of it because it is part of the history.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, man. I mean, human beings are complicated, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when we look at the past, there's this instinct to almost like view it like it's a movie, or view it like it's a comic book or something like that it wasn't real people doing real things. And,
right.
Like part of writing history or doing any type of like history media is storytelling. So as soon as we take the weird like complicated nature of human experience and we turn it into a story, we've already sort of sanded off the edges. And so what I really hope to do on my show is to both like have fun with the stories, because you need the stories as the hooks, right? But then also
Right.
like remind everyone listening that like the people in the past were people, and
Yeah.
that means that they were like complicated and sometimes horrible and sometimes hilarious and sometimes great and sometimes all of those things. And that's just sort of what I believe about humanity, to be honest. It's like I believe that human beings contain multitudes, and that we shouldn't shy away from the bad, and we should look at it with clear eyes. But we should also be able to understand that like bad and good can sort of exist together in the life of a human being, you know?
Right. So, with that being said, have you ever had, do you get a lot of criticism or scathing reviews from people when you touch on a subject and you're like, this is not even just when you're kind of calling out, the bad part of things, but just when you're breaking down a myth. And because even I've done family genealogy for years, and there's one story from a great great grandpa deep down that, you know, we had heard that he had gotten a shootout with this school teacher and shot
Whoa.
him in the butt when he jumped out the window. And but then when we went and started looking through the documents, yes, there was a shooting scrape. Yes, this happened. Yes, this happened, but it wasn't as the family lore had
Right.
described it. But when my dad and I were talking to one of the relatives about it, she kept arguing with us, well, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. It's like, this is what the documents say.
Yeah.
So, kind of with that, do you ever get a lot of pushback from people? Well, I don't care what this says. This is what happened. This is what happened.
Uh, sometimes. So thankfully, most of the people that listen to the show are people like you. So they tend to be people that are pretty open-minded about this stuff. They come to the show because they want nuance, I hope. Maybe I'm
Right.
pumping myself up a little too much there, but like I like to think that the people that are drawn to it are like ready for like adult conversations about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also like it's never really my goal to like be like I'm gonna take these people down a peg, or like I'm like coming for someone or for something. However, in busting myths, you do end up tipping over some sacred cows. So, like the one that recently where I got the most, like, again, it's never anything too serious, but it's just sort of
Right.
somewhat negative feedback. There's two that come to mind. So when I did the Parthenon marbles episodes, so for your audience that don't know, they might know them better as the Elgin marbles. And so
Right.
these are these sculptures that were originally on the Parthenon in Athens, ancient Athens, and in the 1800s, a British aristocrat, a Scottish lord, had them like chopped off of the Parthenon and then shipped back to London, and they still remain in the British Museum to this day. And they are hugely controversial museum objects. The nation of Greece has been trying for, decades to get the Parthenon marbles brought back to the Acropolis. And there are many in Britain who believe that the Parthenon marbles, or the Elgin marbles as they call them, should remain in the UK. And so when I did that one, I all of a sudden met some folks online who are defenders of the Elgin marbles. They tend to be British folks. And there was one person in particular, there's this one guy who's a kind of, should I call him an academic? He's a writer. How about that? This guy who's a writer, who's sort of a well-known figure, who basically makes his life just writing articles defending the British Museum's claim on these sculptures. So he
Right.
actually reached out to me during that process, and he was polite enough, but like he was like, I take serious umbrage with what you are putting out in the world, and you claim to be a myth buster, but like you have not thought about this and this. And it did point me to some corrections I did need to make, and I made those corrections on the show. But I was like, man, how much do I want to engage with this guy? Because here's one of the things: when you're making stuff on the internet, there is there's sort of like an evil urge to be like, oh, if I got into a big public argument with this guy, that could drive interest towards my podcast.
Trust me, as a sports podcast, there for a while we had a segment on our show, and anybody who's listened cross, I told Sebastian that we do cuss a lot, so if it offends you, this is your warning now. But we had a segment that I called "Shut the Fuck Up," because we would take these clickbaity clips or whatever that people are just trying to get a rise, and we would bust them down on the show that, hey, just shut up. This is the stupidest thing in the world. So I do feel you on that end of it.
Yeah. So I really had to like sort of stand on some principle, like not give in to that devil on my shoulder going like, ooh, make this argument public and then there'll be interest in what you're saying. Like, no, it's not worth it, because that will just attract more folks that I'm going to have to fight with, as opposed to like, and also I'm not really going to win in a fight with a man whose entire life it is to have these arguments in public spaces. Right. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to kind of like let that one pass. But that was one that, interestingly, now I also heard from a lot of people who live in England and the UK who are like, yeah, we should repatriate them, completely on the other side of the issue. So it's not just like British people believe that these sculptures should be in Britain. In fact, one English listener reached out and they're like, oh, in England, this is a real class thing. So if you are a working or middle class, at least according to this person, if you are a working or middle class, person from the UK, you tend to be on the side of like, hey, the British Museum should do the ethical thing. Whereas upper crust Britons tend to have a more nostalgic view of, keeping the trophies of empire,
Right.
And so that this one listener was like, I don't care at all if the British Museum keeps this stuff. And the people that tend to care the most about it are these folks that go to these very expensive private schools in Britain and are sort of part of this elite class. Now, again, that's just the opinion of that one particular listener.
Right, yeah.
But that one was interesting. That one ended up being kind of touchy. That one it's an issue that I think for those of us that don't live in the UK, it's just like, oh, that's a curious little debate. But if for those people that live in the UK, some feel it very deeply, and a lot of Greek people also feel extremely deeply about that issue.
Right.
Yeah.
So on the American side of it, I think you could kind of compare it to like indigenous people wanting their stuff back, and these museums and that. So completely understand that, and it is one of those, because let's face it, and if the British want to come after me, whatever, I'm a big guy, I can handle it. But it's one of those things that the British were notorious for that. Look at what they did in Egypt and Greece and Rome and all these other places where they, the joke is if they could have took the Sphinx, they would have took the Sphinx, and if they could have took the pyramid. So yeah, I get that. But was there another one that you said that really drew a lot of flack?
So over a year ago, I forget how long ago it was, I did a whole series on Sparta and the history of the Spartans. And I knew that there were people out there that were particularly had this nostalgia for the Spartans, or were especially invested in the myth of Sparta. And sure enough, when I did that show, I got people just being like, well, you got this wrong. You did this, you went too far in the other direction, was the thing I often heard. You went too far in the other direction. And it's like, well, what I do on the show is I try to give an entertaining survey of what the best research is saying, what all the kind of most contemporary scholars are saying about it. Like, I'm trying to just reflect what is out there by people who are having these conversations at the highest level that I can get access to, right? So, it's often not just my opinion on this stuff. And when it is my opinion, I'm pretty darn clear. I'm pretty like, hey, like, this is what I think. This is my opinion. This is not necessarily the scholarly consensus. So, like, in the world of academia, the idea that there's been a myth around Sparta has been accepted for like over 100 years. Like, this is like not a controversial idea if you are someone who studies ancient Greece seriously. But in popular consciousness, or in popular culture, there's still a real investment in the idea of these sort of Spartan supermen who were just like, the epitome of masculine virtue. And so, there's stuff out there in like the manosphere. There's stuff out there on kind of really sort of fringe political movements that like the Spartans because they see them as this historical example of purity. And that's just not true. That's just not like historically true at all. There's all these reasons why it's not true. And that's what I talked about on the show. And also about how their myth has evolved. And so some of those people that are invested in that myth, even in like the 2020s, they show up and they're like, fuck this guy,
Yeah, and I get that. Now, one of them I'm surprised you didn't get a lot of flack back for, because there is, and as people who've listened to my OPE Unscripted shows from last year, I talked to James Townsend of the Billy the Kid Coalition. I'm surprised you didn't get a certain sect of people who tried to come at you for that one too, because there is a certain group that, Brushy Bill is Billy the Kid, and they're not going to change their mind on anything. And that was a big contention between the Billy the Kid Coalition and a lot of these other people, and James and I have kind of had this conversation a little bit, and we're hoping to continue it in a little bit further. I understand what the history says and everything else, but I do disagree somewhat that the official record seems wrong. Because a lot of things in there. So I do not believe Brushy Bill or somebody like that is who they claim they are, but
Sure.
I do think something different happened there. So that surprises me that you didn't have a little bit of flack from a certain group come in and try to yell at you for that part of it.
Sure. They may have just not found me. That's the thing. They just maybe didn't get, the podcast didn't get through their transom there. But, I often find that folks like that, so if you are part of like the Billy the Kid Coalition, then that means that you have a genuine interest in history, right? And so I find that folks like that, when they listen to my show, game recognizes game. Like they get, I hope, or a lot of times I think they go, oh, I listened to your show and I realized that you're someone that actually does your homework. And like, yes, you read that book. I've read that book too. Right. Like, and so, so those folks, and like, yeah, I think my conclusions on Billy the Kid, were very much informed by the best books that I could read on Billy the Kid. Right. And so, yeah, if someone, and again, I don't really have too much of a horse in that race, to be honest with you. So if, and this is what I feel about all of the topics that I cover, if someone was to come and put forward better evidence that goes like, no, actually, this new research that has been peer reviewed and looked at and is really thoughtfully done shows a different conclusion, then we should go with the new conclusion. Right. I feel like that's sort of that when science is being done correctly, that's what we do. So, that's how I feel about all of my topics, is that like, if new and better research comes forward and like, changes our understanding of something, we get to change our minds.
Right. And just so there's not some confusions with the listeners, the Billy the Kid Coalition believes the same way as Sebastian does.
Oh,
Billy
okay.
was killed by Pat, but there's a sect, and I don't know if you ever heard the author Edwards. There's a sect of Billy the Kid people that are strongly, Brushy Bill was,
Sure.
Billy the Kid. This is all what happened. We have the proof, but we're not going to show you the proof. So there's that whole sect there. So and they're very much that they attack stuff like that. So that's why I said
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
really surprised you didn't get much out of there. That it seems like anytime there's some kind of Billy the Kid thing, the Brushy Billers show up and really
The brushy
really attack
billers.
it.
Well, I will. I'll give you another one, and this one I think actually ended up working out all right. But many years back, I did an episode where I talked about eclampus vitus.
Yeah.
So for your listeners that might not know, eclampus vitus are a social club. You're in Iowa, there,
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Okay, there are probably some of them in Iowa, I'd imagine.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. They're it seems like they're mostly in the American like Southwest. Arizona seems to be a big spot for these clubs. California, but Nevada, but also through the American Midwest seems like as
Yeah.
well. So this is this like sort of social club that got started in mining camps in the 1800s, and it
Then they're
was set up
probably
as like
all over the place in Iowa
yeah.
because Iowa, in the southern part of Iowa, it's nothing but old coal mines and stuff. So
Okay, so you probably got some eclampus vitus guys there in
yeah.
Iowa, but yeah, so it started as a joke version of the Freemasons, which I love. I already love it. It's like a funny idea where it's just like, hey, we're just
Right.
going to get together like a drinking club, and it's just really going to be about drinking and hanging with the boys,
Yep.
and doing some like light civic help, like
Yeah. Yeah.
some light charity is also involved. But
Got to keep up that charity exemption on taxes, so we're going to give a little bit here or there.
yeah, yeah. But part of what they also do is that they do historical pranks and hoaxes. That's like another big part of their thing, especially in California, and like the sort of the Southwest of the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they set up like fake historical plaques to either things that did happen, like it's like a wild party happened here, or like, the craziest old drunk you ever knew lived at this house, like stuff like that, right?
I was probably related to them too, so we're good.
Right. And so I kind of love it. And so they were behind this one very famous historical hoax that happened in California around something called Drake's Plate, which was
Yep, yep.
it was supposedly an engraving that had been left in California by Sir Francis Drake that acted as physical evidence that Drake had been the first European to make it to California. And so but the actual plate itself had actually been this elaborate hoax cooked up by eclampus vitus. So anyway, I do my show, and I'm actually fairly celebratory of eclampus vitus. Because I think it's actually quite funny, their whole shtick. And but the thing that actually raised some eyebrows is that my artist created this piece of art that had the motto of eclampus vitus on it and like a miner. And I had some guys from eclampus vitus go like, "Hey, I heard your episode. I liked it. Can you make that like for sale, that emblem?" And so I'm like, sure, great. I'll sell T-shirts. The eclampus vitus guys will buy them. That they did not like that. And so again, it almost wasn't even about the content of the show. It was just like, you've got this image out
Right.
there. It didn't even say eclampus vitus on it. It just had their motto on it. And so and the thing is, they are a loyal brotherhood, let me tell you. And so when word got out online that I was hawking like faux eclampus vitus wear, then the guys showed up and were like, we're gonna kind of like, bomb you on social media. And I was like, whoa, I do not need this heat. I did not realize what I was doing here. I actually did this at the request of some people. But then a very thoughtful dude from an Arizona chapter reached out, and he was like, "Hey, I listened to your show. I actually loved your show. I think you totally get us. I think you totally get what we're about. But here's the thing: there's a lot of people that like it's I guess it's very hard for them to like keep their organization from having like unofficial offshoots. So like,
Gotcha.
guys who are just like starting up like a kind of like random biker gang will sometimes go like, we're Eclampus Vitus. And so the Eclampus Vitus guys are like, no, 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 we're a very specific thing. Not every weirdo group gets to be us, And so they're like, that's why we can't just like, you can't just be selling random gear with our thing on it, because like this actually like helps. We're trying to shut down these like unofficial groups. And
Right.
so I was
Yeah.
like, I totally get it. Not for sale anymore. Done. Like, off the market. Totally made sense. And then he was really lovely, and he's like, if you're ever in Arizona, like you can come to one of the clubhouses, and I'll make you a guest member. And I was like, wow, okay,
There you
cool. So yeah, there's an interesting community I sort of met through this whole thing. But again, that was not me trying to profit off of
Right,
their whole thing.
right.
That was just like, chalk that up to ignorance. And as soon as I was informed that it was not kosher, I immediately took it down. So
Yeah, it's crazy what people do with that stuff. It's understandable because you see, people doing stuff with like the Templar cross and stuff like that, where, okay, well, now all of a sudden we're the Templars. Well,
right.
no, I don't think there's been an actual Templar since, the 1300s.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't, I think there's a website now that if you pay like $50, you're a Templar, and it's like, no, whatever. It's kind of like the now if you pay $100, you'll get a certificate and you can perform weddings because you're an official in our church and stuff like that. So,
Sure.
uh,
Yeah.
so I get that whole part of their stuff. But so you were originally a teacher.
Mhm.
Now I keep running it through my mind. I know you've said you were a history teacher, but I swear you also said you were an English teacher at one point too.
Yeah.
How do you go from being a teacher into podcasting about this stuff?
So I live in Ontario, Canada, and here to be a high school teacher, you have to have 2 teachables, and so
Okay.
you need to be qualified to teach. That means you need to have taken enough university courses in 2 subjects to be able to teach them at the high school level. So my teachables are history, and if you are qualified to teach history, you can teach everything in what is called the Canadian and World Studies curriculum. So that is like all social sciences, geography, like anthropology. There's a whole like massive list of courses that fall under that. And then my other teachable is English, so I taught English from grades 7 to grade 12 here in Ontario.
Cool.
But the podcast was very much inspired by my teaching. So, especially teaching history, I found that I had kind of accrued all of these great stories that I used as hooks in my history class to get
Yeah,
the kids
yeah.
interested. And then, not all of those stories were necessarily historically accurate. And there was one time in particular that I kind of got called out on one by a student. So I tell this story all the time, but I'll tell it again. So I was telling the story of Rasputin's assassination.
Okay,
So
yeah.
it was totally kind of off topic. We were talking about like World War I in my grade 10 history class. And, the Russian Empire came up, and I'm like, oh, this could be a good little hook. I'll just tell them about like the wild story of Rasputin's death. Now, if you don't know, the thumbnail version is that this like mystic who was an advisor to the Tsar and the Tsarina, who many of the aristocrats thought had way too much influence, gets brought to an aristocrat's house where they try to kill him first by poison. So they poison all of the pastries he's eating. They poison his wine. It doesn't seem to be working. He's just eating more pastries. He's drinking more wine. He's getting like really drunk. And they're like, how is this poison not working? And so they're like, we just have to shoot him. And so they come back in, and one of the aristocrats like shoots him in the chest point blank. He falls down, and they think he's dead. And they go to another room. They're like, maybe we should check. We should double check. Make sure he's dead. And the story goes that when they go to check on him, they like lean over his body, and then right then he jumps back up and he's alive, and he starts to chase them around the mansion, and then he starts running out of the place, and they shoot him again and again. They get another gun out there. Eventually they shoot him in the back a number of times, and we're told that finally they give him one in the head to finish him off. Then they roll him into a carpet, and they take the carpet to one of the freezing cold rivers in St. Petersburg, and it's the middle of the winter, and they dump him in the river. And then the story goes that the next morning he was found somehow out of the carpet, looking like he was clawing at the ice, and the final cause of death was exposure.
Yeah.
And not the poison, not the bullets. Now, I tell this whole tale with even more detail than I just told it right now. And one of the students in my class is like, that's not true. That's not true. There's no way. He's like, actually, I've heard that story before, and I know it's not true. And I'm like, well, you know what? Fair enough. It is really hard to believe. It's a pretty crazy story. And in that moment, I was like, you know what? I have never looked into this well enough to be able to give you the other version of events, because it does seem pretty impossible.
Yeah.
So then I went home from there, and I was like, I'm going to actually do some research here and discover where this story comes from, and what the other version of events is. And what I discovered is that story comes from one very specific, a Russian aristocrat who's kind of an unreliable narrator, right? and that there are other versions of events, and many of them are far less, sensational, right? Yeah, exactly. But I was able to bring that back to my class, and I turned it into like a little kind of mini lesson on using sources. So I was like, hey, look, this version says this version says that. How do we come to an understanding of what the truth is? And I was like, oh, this is one of my better days as a history teacher, I think. We're actually doing history as opposed to just like hearing about it.
Right.
And, when you're doing it right, I wish I was that good every day. I wish I was.
Yeah.
I wish I could every day there was a like, today we're going to do the history as opposed to like just read about it. And so I'd been a fan of history podcasts at that point, and there were a handful that I loved, and then a lot of others that I thought were poor. And so I was like, I think I could throw my hat into the ring. And then after I'd sort of had that moment with the death of Rasputin historical myth, I came back to my wife. I'm like, that's the idea for the podcast. That's it. That's the hook. It's got to be these wild stories, and then is there any truth to these wild stories? And that's a way into talking about history. So that's how I got the idea for the show. And then I just like, I kind of got obsessed with the idea, and I wrote a ton of scripts, and I pre-recorded like 6 or 7 of them before I released them to the world. This was back in 2015. And then I started putting them out with the goal that I would try and release one every 2 weeks for a year and see if it got any momentum. And amazingly, even within that first season, I found an audience. It's incredible that you've been with me since then, because if you were with me then you were like one of the first like few thousand people that listened to the show. And 11 years later, it's now my full-time job. And we're more than 250 episodes deep now.
Well, I will be honest with you. I was season 1, and the whole reason is because 2015 I started my job that I have now, and I'm a security guard at a facility, and we have to go out on patrols. Mm-hmm. So we have to do a 2-hour patrol throughout the factory and hit certain scan points. So we also have to wear hearing protection.
Sure.
Well, what better hearing protection than earbuds that I can listen to, something on as I'm going. And I don't like listening to the music because then I can't hear my radio. our walkies. So it was like, okay, well, if I listen to somebody talking on here, I can still listen to, I can still hear my walkie go off. So I was like, okay, well, first, I'm a big paranormal person. I'm what they call a skeptic believer. So that's one of those things that I first looked at.
Sure.
Then there was, I can't remember the name of the podcast, but there was a guy that went through and talked about, not like your end of it, but he actually told the myths where, he went through like Greek mythology and would pick these stories. But then it got to the point where I'm a very impatient person. So when there's only one episode, it's like, nope, 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 nope. I got to wait till these build up.
Sure.
So then I came across yours. I was like, okay, I like this story. I like this story. And then, of course, it happened again that I had run out of episodes on yours. So it's like, damn it. Now I got to wait for this one to build up. So, and then I came back to it and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm good. And then I've been hooked on it ever since. And
Amazing.
I think what draws me to yours a lot more than like some of these others is you do topics that I don't think a lot of other people reach into. Like one of my favorite ones, and then this one kind of ties into a question I have down here, is you did the Robert Johnson at the Crossroads. Now, I'm probably not into music on the level of you, and then we have a friend to show, Dusty Evely, who is a big musician or musical guy that I did an episode with last year. And, I've grown up with music from all eras. And you did the Robert Johnson one. Of course, I grew up hearing Robert Johnson, and you really broke that down and actually were playing some of clips of his actual stuff that I didn't know really existed. So you brought that, and then from that point on, I was kind of hooked with it. But you are kind of inspired by your music. You do a lot of your own music in the show. I know you said in the past that you were kind of the 50s, 60s surfer inspired stuff. Can you say what your probably top 3 to 5 influences are for your music?
Oh man. Okay. So, well, I mean, I'm just like a massive music fan. I've been playing guitar since I was 14. I played in a bunch of different bands. And I think part of the reason I felt like I could start a podcast is that I'd done a bunch of bands. And so I'd like put my stuff out there creatively, and I just knew that how to kind of hustle to get people interested in a band a little bit. And again, my bands were never particularly popular. More people have heard my music because of the podcast than ever did otherwise. So, I had lived in Ottawa. I played in a bunch of sort of like underground, sort of like indie rock, punk rock bands here in Ottawa. Then I moved to Toronto, and that's where I started Dirty Church, which does the theme music for the show. And that band was sort of like a Toronto bar band, like, and so the type of music that I make with those bands was really kind of garage rock inspired, and a sort of 60s surf rock inspired. Now, I just want to preface this, I listen to all sorts of music, like any true music fan, of course. Your heart must be open to all sorts of things. I'm a 40-year-old dad now, so I have entered my jazz phase. I am I am deep into jazz these days, which I was like, I can't believe I ever became that guy, but I'm that guy now. But no, I love so much music. But the music that I write, so when I started like my Ottawa bands and my Toronto band, it was these sort of like 60s garage. Well, okay, first the Beatles, obviously, right? Like, I feel like I heard a great quote once where it said that saying that you're inspired by the Beatles is like saying that you're inspired by the alphabet.
That's true.
It's just such a part of like the building blocks of all like modern pop and rock and roll. Like, let's be real, right? But I really got into like bands like the Sonics from the Pacific Northwest, who are sort of this really kind of wild 60s band with like, like imagine those sort of like kind of 60s Beatlesy sort of songs, but played with this like total wild abandon. That was really inspiring. Also, the music of like Dick Dale and the Ventures. That was very inspiring when I was doing a lot of the surf stuff. But then when we came to Toronto, I was like, oh, I want to kind of bring in like a soul element here. So, obviously like James Brown and Otis Redding were really sort of important to me. But, gosh, there's at the time as well, there's a Canadian kind of garage rock dude living in Germany called King Khan. He had this great band called King Khan and the Shrines that I found incredibly inspiring. I thought that was so cool, which was sort of like a punky garage rock, like soul review. Like imagine
Right.
that, right? And so that was really cool, and that was sort of an inspiration for that band. I mean, I love the Clash. The Clash are like one of my very favorite bands of all time. But now I listen to so much new music. I love like alt country. I love a lot of singer-songwriter stuff, but that doesn't necessarily reflect in the music that I write. But like, artists like Jason Isbell and Sturgill Simpson and stuff like that. I mean, I love Afrobeat. Not that that's really part of my music, but yeah, the music that I write. But now I'm making new music with a different band here in Ottawa, and that is way more influenced by kind of like early REM and the sort of really jangly guitar, or like indie bands like Apples and Stereo. I don't know if that's a band that's
Like I said, I'm one of those, and I told Dusty this last year when we did the episode, that I don't so more listen to the artist. It's if I hear a song that resonates with me, then it goes into the list.
Sure.
So you could look at my playlists and, okay, there's Carly Rae Jepsen's Call Me Maybe. Well,
Sure.
that's because it kind of just hit me at the moment.
Yeah.
But then I've got like Hailstorm and Breaking Benjamin and
cool.
those type of bands, because those are what I'm more into. Or you can go to two of my favorite all-time artists, in Sam Cooke and Jim Croce.
Oh yeah. Right.
So I mean
that's just objectively great music, though, right? Like
yeah.
So,
like I said,
you don't have a heart. You don't have a heart if you're not into that stuff,
Right. And like Dusty and I were talking, he would start naming like albums. Like, Dusty, I don't know albums. I can tell you a song, I can tell you a group, but I don't know albums. I can tell you what I've got on my playlist. But another band that I liked, that I don't know if a lot of people know the name of the band, but they could like say, well, I know that song, or I know, once they hear it, is OAR, Of a Revolution. I love that band.
Yeah.
So and so a lot of people, I can talk to a lot of people about that, but I couldn't name you an album they made, but I can sit there and name songs and what I like about them. So, but I did kind of notice a shift in your shows with your music, because early on you could hear the surfer guitar styles in it, and now it's kind of shifted. So that's why I had to ask about the music, because you can hear the shift.
That's interesting. It's interesting you can hear that. Yeah, though that's just maybe reflects with where my guitar playing's gone. Yeah, there was a moment where I was like really trying to master certain kind of like surf rock techniques with my guitar playing, and I've since sort of moved on to sort of different sort of stuff. But again, that's stuff I still love. I'm never been one to jettison anything. I think there's some people, especially creative people, who are like, I was into this at that time, and now I don't go back to that. That's not me. That's not me. I'm like always just like adding to the gumbo, like I try not to throw anything away. And so, yeah, I mean, I still love a lot of sort of surf music. And, again, there was a moment there. I'm also a vinyl collector. I've got a, big fat record collection. And for a while I got really interested in collecting all these sort of rare 60s garage rock bands. So these are like small bands, a lot of them, from a lot of them from like the Pacific Northwest in the United States, who had like one hit, but like had a really interesting sound and were just like guys that heard the Rolling Stones and were just like, maybe we can do it, and maybe we can play our high school dance, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. I get that.
I love that stuff. Like that to me is actually very like there's a joy to that music that I can't help but really love. But like I said, I have like a very diverse musical diet now, and because so much of my life now is writing, this is part of why the jazz has come in. So much of my life is writing. Instrumental music is now in my house a lot because I find it's easier to write to that.
Yeah, yeah.
But like I said, I never throw anything away. I mean, I'll still like like this past weekend, like I'll put on London Calling and be like, yeah, fuck yeah, like this is the best.
Last night I fell asleep to the High Kings Irish folk music, so
Beautiful.
I can't say much anything about it. I keep around a lot of stuff too, and like I said, I listen to a lot of different things, and I've never been talented musically, but I can tell I've got an ear for it. So
Great.
I can sit here and say, okay, yeah, I can hear this, I can hear that, I can hear this. Like with what I just said with you, where you could tell the shift from when it went from surfer guitar riffs to more of because you jumped from like an electric guitar to the acoustic on some of these episodes, so you can
Yeah.
hear the shift between the two. So I can tell that stuff, but don't ask me to try playing anything. Don't ask me to try singing anything because
Oh, sure,
it's
man.
not going to happen.
No, that's all right. That's nice. It's great. No, honestly, I love it that you asked about music. Whenever I talk to people, rarely do people want to talk to me about music, and it's the thing I like talking about the most.
Well, hey, one of these times maybe we can get you to jump on with Dusty because he pulls out some of the most random groups. He'll put a post on like Blue Sky or Twitter or something, and
Yeah.
it'll be like the most random group in the world. It's like, where are you getting these things?
Man, the real heads know.
And he is. I think he also has a vinyl collection, so I think he does a lot of that stuff too. And I a lot of people don't know this, but I actually started college. Well, I didn't start college, but in college, I went to school as a journalist.
Oh, yeah?
So I do have a little bit of a background. I don't have a degree in it, but I do have a background in it. So I like to do my research and hit those hard hitting questions. So
Sure.
it's not the same interview over and over again.
Sure.
But just to kind of jump back into things, are there any, quote unquote fake histories you've researched, but still aren't sure that they are fake, that you're still like, I've done the research on it, but I still don't believe that this is the case? I think the original story is more of a truth than what this research is showing.
Yeah, interesting question. The one that always comes to mind goes right back to my first season, which is the story of Joan of Arc.
Okay.
I still can't really make sense of the story of Joan of Arc. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And
yeah, how does a 14-year-old girl, lead an army into victories and stuff? Yeah, I get that.
yeah, and when I went into that one, I expected to like learn that, when we look at this a bit more critically, we discover that like she didn't actually do many of the things they say she did. But that's actually not what you find.
Right.
What you find is all of these people being like, yeah, and I couldn't believe it. Like she really did do this stuff. And there's no real good explanations for what exactly went on there.
Right.
Now, I mean, okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a touch. There are lots of historians who have tried to explain it as best they can, but there's still so many question marks around that story, around what was going on with her internally, around the fact that the armies of the French Dauphin were like, yes, we will let a 17-year-old girl again at a time when 17-year-old girls were not allowed to do much.
Right.
We're
Except
going
for
to let
get
her
married and have kids.
yeah, we're going to let her lead the army from the front, like be the flag bearer. it's quite something, and it's a story that like I still. I mean, again, I almost want to return to it again. It's been like 10 years now, and it's just like at the end of that one, I didn't feel like I came away being like I've separated any fact from fiction here. It's just all muddled together, and what's wilder is that we have a lot of documentary evidence about that case. We've got a lot of people that were eventually because there were trials involved, and so when you have a
Right.
trial that was involved, you get all this testimony that gets recorded, even in the 1400s, right?
Yep.
And so you wish that you had that kind of evidence for other figures from that period of time. So we have a lot of people that like swear like in the context of a trial that like these things happened. Like, whoa, it's quite something. So that one always comes to mind as a sort of a spot where myth and history are clearly mingling, but I was not able to separate them, and I've not really read any stuff, or I didn't back then anyway, that properly pulls it apart. I mean, there are moments where you're like, oh, this is probably what happened here, but the story altogether still is just bewildering.
So to kind of continue on that, are we going to get a season where maybe you go back and pull some of your greatest hits and do a remix of them? Or because I know you mentioned that you'd also like to go back and do like the Shakespeare stuff again after doing your Macbeth
Yeah.
episodes.
Yeah, there's a few, especially from season one. And again, if people would want that, I'm so always worried that like my listeners would be like, I don't want to hear a thing I've already heard, you know? So I'm kind of cautious around that. But I think there's a couple where people would actually be interested. So I've thought a lot about the Shakespeare one. There's another podcaster who I've collaborated with before. He's currently doing a movie podcast. It's called 1999, the podcast. It's all about the movies that came out in the year 1999. A guy named John Brooks. He used to do a history podcast as well. And he is a Shakespeare truther. He believes that the Earl of Oxford, this guy, Edward de Vere, was the real author of the plays. And I totally respect this guy, and I think he's a great dude. He just holds this one opinion that I think is completely wrong. The other opinion that he holds that I think is completely wrong is that Star Wars Phantom Menace is a good film.
Okay, now I'm going to argue with what we got with the sequels. Star Wars: The Phantom Menace is like the Godfather, so I do agree with them on a little bit there.
Oh man, let's maybe not go down the Star Wars rabbit hole here. But yes, anyway, I joke.
Hey, if you could see my wall over there,
yeah.
I am such a. We do Star
You're a
Wars
Star Wars fan?
episodes on. Oh yeah, huge.
Yeah, right on. Oh well, I mean, hey, maybe another episode I'll come back. We can go deep on Star Wars stuff. But,
We have a round table. I've got 3 other guys that come on, and we have a round table when we do these unscripted. So there's more room. There's room for more people.
Oh man, I probably wouldn't be able to clash with like the serious heads on that one. But anyway, I joke, but he's someone who I totally respect, who I think is really thoughtful and smart, and he really kind of is skeptical of Shakespeare's authorship. So I think if I was to return to that, I might go like, oh, this might be fun as like a debate or a discussion between the two of us to maybe flesh that topic out a bit more. But yeah, like back in that first season, I did 2 parts on Napoleon. It was like an early one. Like if I was to do Napoleon now, it would be like 3 hefty episodes, So, sometimes I think about going back to that. But those are the ones that come to mind. And then obviously I said Joan of Arc. After that first season, I think the show kind of found its legs a little bit more, sort of settled into what it was going to be. And so there's not too much else where I'm like, oh, this one I need to go back to, because after that point, I kind of ramped up the level of research I did for each episode. Once I realized that people were listening and I realized that people sort of expected a certain level of rigor from the show, I was like, well, I can't let my people down. So I've tried to be really, really rigorous ever since then.
has there been any topic that somebody's brought up or something that they're like, man, you really should do this for an episode or a trilogy or whatever, and you start doing the research and you're like, no, it's either too controversial, there's not enough information, or some other reason why you said no, I can't do this one.
Yes. So, I mean, there are some topics that I know people will be interested in, but are like incredibly controversial. So anything around a like religious figure, obviously.
Right.
So, name your big religious figures, I feel like the one I might be able to get away with would be like a Life of the Buddha story, because I feel like
I was just thinking that one.
I feel like the Buddhists are a little more are a little more relaxed about someone sort of investigating the mythology, let's say, whereas like you're just asking for trouble if you start poking at. Well, maybe I shouldn't say asking for trouble. If you were to take on, let's say, Jesus, right? You are wading into a debate that like rages, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the thing is, there's a whole world on the internet of like, atheist versus believer content. And I don't really want to be part of that.
Yeah.
To be
Understandable.
honest
But
with
if you ever dig into it, I know the perfect guest for you.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
I almost got him on this show, but he's in the middle of writing a book, so he didn't have the time for the times that I had. That's Dr. Dan McClellan.
Oh,
He's
yeah,
a
I know him.
tremendous biblical scholar, and that would be perfect if you ever decided to dig into it.
Well, when I say I know him, I've seen his videos, is what I
Right.
mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
And I
seems
same
like
way.
he seems like not only a very thoughtful scholar, but a very good communicator on these things.
Yeah. And like I said, when I send my emails out for this, he was one of the ones that I did, and he responded immediately and said, "Yeah, I would love to, but I'm in the middle of writing this book and doing this." So I try to I've asked people to push these off to the end of the year, and it's like, well, yeah, but I do this at the beginning of the year, so it's a little bit harder for me. But I appreciate it. I'll reach out to you next year. So that would be
Yeah.
perfect if you ever decided to get him on.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, again, the spirit of my show, again, and that's the thing. I could never do what he does, because he is a true
Right.
scholar of the Bible, right? Like, he's a true
Yeah.
religious scholar, a PhD, right? And so
Multiple.
right, yeah, exactly. So that when I wouldn't dare kind of compete,
Yeah.
and the kind of spirit of my show is to always sort of comes from a spot of love, weirdly. I don't maybe love isn't the right word, but there's a very famous quote that I kind of use as my kind of guide star for both being a teacher and being a podcaster. It was I got introduced to it from one of my favorite history teachers. And it was a quote from Hannah Arendt, the famous like philosopher, writer from the early 20th century. And she said, "Education is the point in life where we decide if we love the world enough to take responsibility for it." And
Deep.
yeah, right. And I that has stuck with me. And so what I want to do with my show is always show people what is to love about history. Here's the thing that is interesting about it. Here's the thing that's to be loved about the human experience and our past. But then also, we need to take responsibility for it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And so
That's kind of the Santa Ana thing, that if you don't learn from the past, then you're doomed to repeat history.
yeah. And I mean, I do believe that as well. But I think part of the joy of what I try to do is to go like, there's so much that's fun and interesting about the human story. And if we learn more about it, there's actually a way to like find meaning in our
Right.
existence. Maybe that's maybe too heavy, but like there's a way to sort of find meaning with why we are here, or at least how we arrived. And then from there, it's the like, okay, do we take responsibility? So, whenever I'm sort of choosing a topic to do, I'm always like, is there a way into this that's like, here's what's to be learned, here's what's interesting, here's what's fun, here's here is the sort of concept that we should sort of like take from this that hopefully helps us sort of deepen our understanding of ourselves.
Right.
So sometimes when it's so that's why I tend not to choose stuff that's just like, this is just going to be combative, because this is not about
Right.
like, you know, what we are learning to love about the world, you know?
Do you ever feel like that do you ever have those moments where you're like, yeah, I want to be combative on this, and maybe I'm not going to put it on our fake history, but maybe on like the YouTube channel or something, we're going to just drop this and see what I can get
Yeah.
out of it.
I mean, yeah, and the thing is like, you know, on my show, I really try to keep away from like contemporary politics, but of course I have opinions about that stuff,
Right.
right? I have all sorts of opinions about it. And, you know, and so like sometimes there's things where I'm just like, I do want to speak on this, but I tend to hold back just because again, it's like there's so much noise uh, around contemporary politics from every commentator
Yeah.
that I would want to make sure that I'm saying something valuable that adds to the
Right.
conversation
Right.
and isn't just more like just angry uh, angry noise in any particular direction. So yeah, you know, but I of course, and you know what, I often have like very specific opinions about what's happening in Canada, very specific opinions about Canadian American relations. The one
Right.
time I
Right.
ever really sounded off about it on a podcast, someone else invited me on to talk about like, it was sort of right around the time the tariffs got imposed on Canada. And, you know, I had a lot of opinions about like the state of Canadian American relations. And so I really, that was one of the few times that I really was like, okay, people are going to kind of really hear my perspective on this.
Yeah.
But I didn't really bring that to my show. Um, and I guess it's because I feel like the thing that I can, the thing that I know is history. The thing that I have some expertise in is history. And the thing that I can give the best perspective on is the past.
Right.
And
Right.
so, and I feel like in that way, my voice is valuable. And, but there's some times where like, you know, you do want to sort of jump into stuff, or like there are like historical debates. Like, you know, there's a guy I know, there's another podcaster who does a show called History Impossible. You know that guy, Radar von Sternberg? Um,
No, I don't think I've come
yeah.
across his podcast, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. Anyway, he likes to sort of mix it up a little bit more in the culture war stuff, and you know, like so when there was a big debate in the gaming world around the use of the Black Samurai character in Assassin's Creed. Um,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I had done an episode about that person. His name's
Yeah.
Yasuke, and and so I went on his podcast to just be like, hey, here's like here's everything we actually know about this guy, right? And then we kind of from there he was sort of like, well, he kind of broke down the nature of the controversy online. And so the question is like, you know, how much of that controversy online is just people who don't like the idea of there being like a black character in that game,
Right. Yeah.
versus how much that game is accurately reflecting history. And so, you know, again, that was one where I was like, hey, I've actually done some research on this. I can give you at least a well-read perspective.
Which is funny because Assassin's Creed, for just being video games, are like wickedly historically accurate for a lot of their stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, obviously, we don't. There's no proof that there were ancient assassins and Templar stuff, but I mean, when you're actually in, because I'm a gamer too, so
Sure.
I've played a lot of the Assassin's Creeds and that, and like Assassin's Creed 3 touched on the American Revolution.
Sure.
But when you go through that, it was amazingly accurate to what we see on the historical side of things, but they threw their, it's kind of like when I talk about, oh, what's the author's name? The one that wrote Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Killer.
Oh, sure.
Seth Graham, I think is his name. We all know the book was complete BS when it comes to the story, but he was able to do a great blend of historical accuracy with, you know, this BS story.
Right.
And that's what made it such a good thing, and that's what the Assassin's Creeds do is we know the story is BS, but they do a great job of mixing that
Sure.
historical accuracy in there.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. I have a friend that loves those games, and he actually visited Florence, and he was like, man, I actually knew the city so well because I'd played that Assassin's Creed game. He's like, I'd go into an
crazy.
alley, and he was like, I've killed 3 men in this alley.
My favorite, there's two of my favorite of those games. One is Black Flag, which is a pirate version of things.
Hmm.
And then one of the more recent ones is what's I can't remember the name of it, but they covered the Vikings, which you just did
Yeah,
a series on. I've kind of, like I said before, I do genealogy stuff. Well, my dad's grandparents immigrated from Sweden.
hmm,
So my grandpa was first generation born in the United States.
hmm,
So historically speaking, my dad's side or my grandpa's side of the family is Scandinavian. So historically speaking, there's a good possibility I come from Viking, stock.
sure.
And so I've, growing up with that, I've done tons of, I've read I have a couple of books on the sagas, I listened to a lot of that, and uh, so, I that's how it got me into that game a little bit more because, like, man, I read about this, I know
Hmm.
about this guy, I know about this, so yeah, I feel that the same way. So, with that being said, what kind of eras or historical subjects are your favorites?
Oh man, I like to think that I can find something like fascinating in any time or place. The stuff I love going back to is like the that era of first contact. That to me, I just keep going back to that well on the show. But that moment when, like Europeans and like First Nations people first met each other, that time I am just fascinated by. I'm fascinated as a moment in European history, and then I'm fascinated in this moment that the world actually becomes global. The world actually
Right,
becomes
right.
connected in a way that it was not before. And I'm also just kind of obsessed with the idea that it didn't have to go as terribly as it went.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm always like fascinated by those moments of contact where it's like, because so often it becomes violent quickly, but not always, right? And you're like, oh God, it didn't have to always be bad. And
Greed.
yeah, well, right, exactly. And the reasons why it happens and how it happens, I find myself endlessly fascinated by. And so I go back to that era a lot. And so, yeah, that late 1400s, early 1500s, and especially all the stories around sort of the early arrivals in the Americas, and then beyond, right? Just like the way that that kind of first wave of kind of colonialism busting out of Europe, that time is fascinating to me. I like a lot of history heads. I love the ancient Mediterranean. I love ancient Rome. I love ancient Greece. I'm not going to pretend like I don't. Of course I do.
Right, right.
Of course I do
Well,
because it.
what's the joke that you get any group of men together, the first thing that they're going to talk about is the Roman Empire or whatever
Sure,
it is?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know it was a bit of a meme like a couple years ago. It was like, ladies, ask your man how often he thinks about the Roman Empire, and the answer was always like every day. But yeah, no, I am fascinated by that time and place, and I am fascinated by what I love about it is actually how much we are able to know about it because of how much of the writing has survived. And so and it's such detailed writing that those people feel three-dimensional. And so that's what I love when you're like learning about these characters from, literally 2000 years ago, and you're like, oh, this seems like a three-dimensional person. This seems like someone
Yeah.
I could know, and they lived so long ago. And so I'm fascinated by all of that. What else? Oh, okay. Then there's like just like the late 19th century is also one of my favorite times, and this is because of my love of hoaxes and frauds and humbug artists.
Yep.
That was their heyday. We may be living in another golden age of that right now, by the way.
Oh, tell me about it.
But I'm actually myself, I'm just starting to work on a book based on a lot of my podcast scripts, and it's going to be specifically about those stories, about famous hoaxes, famous imposters. And most of the stories that are going to be in that book are from, the 1800s and then sort of turn of the century, right? Early 1900s. And I just love that time because it's also a wild time for technology.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, which is actually what helps fuel this uh, this sort of culture of deceit because something that was like electricity did not exist and then it existed, right?
Yep,
And so
yep.
like imagine if in your lifetime electricity happened, like the how magical that would have seemed, and then how anything truly could have seemed possible.
Well, you could compare it to, like, we're about the same age because I'll be 40 in July, so
Yeah,
we're kind of there. You could compare it to the internet
sure.
because, we grew up in a time where we were pre-internet
Yeah.
and now we're in post-internet, and that was the same way. Well, we can just hop on there and look up anything in the world now, and this is, so that's kind of the same situation there where it's like, okay, well, we didn't get, or when they got electricity, everything brightened because of the lights and all that, whereas us, everything brightened with knowledge because now it was all at our fingertips.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, or did it?
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
But yes, no, I know what you mean, man. I know what you mean. Yeah, so I mean, I'm fascinated by that time, and also I like the. It's also an interesting time for pop culture. It's just like you see the germs of what even our society in 2020 would be in that moment,
Yeah,
especially in the United States and Britain, if you look at those cultures, because so much of global culture has sort of been influenced by those places,
pretty much,
and
yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's just how it went, and so. I'm really fascinated by that time. Also, I just love that era of like great facial hair, just the ultimate mustache time, you know?
Well, they didn't have anything else to do, so they just spent it on, the hair and the mustaches
Well,
and stuff
hey,
like that.
I know you're a sports guy. I'm a bit of a baseball fan, and I will say, if baseball is any indication, the mighty mustache is returning in a proper way, you know?
You got Raleigh Fingers with the little curly Q and Goose Gossage and all those
Yeah.
guys. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
a on
well,
top of football. I'm a baseball fan too. So yeah,
yeah,
we're good
yeah.
on
Well, I
that.
mean, my team's Toronto Blue Jays. I'm like obviously Canadian fan here, so the Jays. So it's our mustache guy's Dylan Cease right now. He's got an amazing stash.
I'm a Braves fan, and we
Yeah.
had Spencer Strider until he decided to shave it. Had the Wyatt Earp mustache.
Oh yeah, nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I got that. But uh, I said we weren't going to take too long. We weren't going to do a 2-hour session here, but I do have a couple more questions for you, and
Sure.
then we'll let you go out of here. So you have a unique name, Sebastian Major.
Yeah, I know.
You also have a unique story on yours. Now, I have to say this. My youngest nephew's name is Gavin Sebastian.
Oh yeah.
So his middle name is Sebastian. We have no clue where his mom came up with getting Sebastian for his name. But you have a unique way of how you got your name, Sebastian. So can you kind of tell how you got your name?
So, okay. So my first name isn't that crazy. It's my middle name that has the really interesting story.
Okay.
So my full name is Sebastian Amadeus Major,
Right.
which sounds like a fake name. It's quite a name to actually like, carry around with you. So Sebastian is not so wild. My dad grew up skiing, and he went skiing in Quebec, where the name Sebastian is a very common name. In
Right.
like for French Canadians. Now I don't spell it like most French Canadians, because they usually spell it Tien. I spell it
Okay.
Tian, Sebastian. But my dad's favorite ski instructor when he was in Quebec was named Sebastian. So that's like he just liked that name from that. Amadeus. So I am in the womb and my parents go and see the major motion picture Amadeus in the theater, and my mom says that when the music got going in that movie, I just started kicking, she was like, "Whoa, this kid's going wild," and so they, as a joke, my parents were like, "We'll make his middle name Amadeus. Wouldn't that be incredible if his name was Sebastian Amadeus Major? Wow, what a name!" And came time to fill out the birth certificate, and they were like, "Yep, Amadeus." So yeah, I have just this wild name, but you grow into it, and now I like
Yeah.
telling the tale. But I've never stopped anyone from giving me nicknames. I'm not one of those people that's like, it must be Sebastian. I'm to my friends, I'm Sebby, I'm Seb, I'm Seabass. I've got a million nicknames. My sister calls me Sabu. Like, I've got a million nicknames. So, and I've never stopped anyone from giving me a nickname, and I kind of appreciate it. Like, to my wife, I'm just Seb.
Right, and see, with mine, actual name is Joseph. Well, I
Sure.
can't stand being called Joseph. That was the name I got called when I got in trouble, and then
Ah,
you always have that one relative that constantly has to say your name a certain way, and it's like, no, I'm tired of hearing that. So I say you can call me anything in the world, just do not call me Joseph.
sure.
That you can call me a dirty son of a bitch. You can call me whatever you want to say. I
Sure.
just do not call me that. So that's the only drawback on my name. So,
Yeah.
but I always love that story. And like I said, we have no idea where my nephew's mom got Gavin Sebastian. So to hear your story on how you got your last name, and obviously your first name, or I mean not your last name,
Middle
your
name,
middle
yeah.
name, and your first name being your dad's favorite ski instructor is,
Yeah.
that gives some a little bit there. But one last thing that I really got for you is I have a suggestion on a topic.
Great.
I brought this up to a friend of mine, James Townsend, who does the Forever West YouTube channel, and we were kind of talking about it, and it's one of those, you may not want to touch on it because it's kind of a controversial thing with it, but I think somebody needs to do it justice because of the story behind it, and that's John Brown. And we're all taught in history that John Brown was just this crazy lunatic that tried to overthrow this, but when you actually sit down and look at him, and the controversial thing is one side praises him and the other side demonizes him. And yes, the way he went about things was not probably the way he should have went about things, because he did murder people. He
Yeah.
did do that stuff, but he was also doing it in support of abolition, the abolishment of slavery. So it's one of those things that I really wish somebody would sit down, and when I brought it up to James, he goes, "Yeah, I don't like that guy." Well,
Ah.
it's one of those. But then I'm also, and I have no problems telling people this. I'm more of a liberal person, but I also grew up in the Midwest where the gun culture is, no matter whether you're a righty, you're a lefty, you're a middle, you grow up with guns, and I
Stick
do.
around. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and so there's a gun group that is a liberal gun group called the John Brown.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that it gets demonized by one side, but it gets martyrized by the other. And I just wish somebody would take a deep dive, and I just don't have the platform to do it with a sports podcast. I get some weird looks when I do the unscripted episodes every year, so try to break down the John Brown thing would be hard for me to do.
Yeah, yeah. It's one you just want to make sure your research is just like,
Yeah,
done well. I will say this, I'm another great history podcaster, friend of mine, Daniele Bolelli. He
I
does
was
history
waiting
on
for you to say that name because I know you love saying that name on your
Daniele
show.
Bolelli. No, Daniele's a wonderful guy. Like, it's one of those cool things that, like, while doing this job. I've gotten to know him. We just both like appreciate each other's work, and I've gotten to know him as a person. I've never met him in person, but we like chat
Right.
on. We zoom it up, and he's a lovely guy and a very intelligent dude and a great podcaster. But he has done a show on
Okay.
John Brown. So if you want to check a history podcast out, I would recommend that one. Yeah, those types of stories are fascinating. He is a figure that I'm interested in. It's anytime you're dealing with someone that uses, violent means to forward a cause, it's
Right.
like it becomes morally fraught, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you're like, and even if the cause is a good, just cause, right? So, but I mean, in a way, this is an interesting question to kind of anchor the whole show, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you do sort of the wrong thing for the right reasons, right? Like, if we go, it's wrong to use violent means to further your ends, then, I mean, or is it, right? Is it wrong?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's the question. Is it wrong to use violent means to further your ends if your end is just, if your end is good, if your end results in greater good for all? But it's tough because that type of thinking can like lead to, disaster down the way, right? The idea that like, well, to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. That type of thinking can also get you like a Stalin, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I
Yeah.
believe that I am actually leading, my people towards this glorious egalitarian future. But to do that, I'm going to need to starve a few million,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
it's just like, it's that thinking can easily become evil, right? But then it's like, this is another question around like any nation that has had a violent revolution, right? If you had a violent revolution and that is celebrated, then you are basically saying it's okay to kill if it is for these ends.
Yep. Yep.
And so, that, and so that immediately gets touchy for any nation in the world. I mean, hey, I'm talking to an American right here, right? Like,
We do it all the time.
I
That's like
know,
a Sunday for us.
exactly. To celebrate the American Revolution is to celebrate a violent rebellion,
Yeah.
and I think most Americans would say it was totally worth it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also
Until recently, I would think.
yeah, or right, or or at least they would say, well, hey, the British started it, right?
Right.
Right.
Damn Canadians too,
Yeah. But there's the thing, like there's, like, in the Canadian context, I think a figure that we talk about a lot is a guy named Louis Riel.
Okay.
And I'm sure he's probably a fairly obscure figure outside of Canada, but he was a Métis man. So he was part Indigenous, part French, and he started like two independent nations within what is now Canada. He's basically considered the father of Manitoba, and he is sort of like a key figure in the history of Saskatchewan. And
Wow.
he had this, basically was like, there's going to be an independent Indigenous and Métis nation on to the west of what was then considered Canada. And eventually it became violent. Eventually there was sort of like a violent, Louis Riel was eventually like at war with the Canadian government at a certain point, right? And it was a violent rebellion, and then he lost, right? And his allies lost,
Yeah.
and then he was like tried and hung for treason, right? And so
Similar to John Brown. That's crazy.
yeah, exactly. And so, but in Canada now, especially in like among Canadian Indigenous communities, Louis Riel's a hero. Right? And even in Manitoba, even beyond just like Indigenous communities, like there's giant murals of Louis Riel in Manitoba. He's considered the father of Manitoba, depending on who you ask. But like he's considered a very heroic figure. And so so I'm fascinated by figures like that, because it's like, hey, that was a guy that many people would say was fighting for his people, was fighting for a group of people who had been oppressed, was fighting for one of the things that had been promised and taken away a million times from indigenous people in North America, which was a sort of sovereign indigenous state. and but then eventually he decided that the only way to make that possible was to violently defend that. So what do you do with a figure like that, right? What do you do with
Yeah.
a figure? John Brown's, I feel like, is even edgier though. Like John Brown's like, let's do some like terrorist action,
Well, that and that kind of goes with the Joan of Arc thing, because they celebrate Joan of Arc for what she did, but when you actually sit down and read things, well, she heard God tell her to go do this, and God told her to do this, and God, you know, she was speaking to God, and all, that's what the stories tell you. Well, that's what the stories tell you about John Brown too. Is
Right.
John Brown sat there and said, "Well, God told me that I needed to do this. God told me that I needed to do that." One gets celebrated, one gets split, and then you got like guys like Nat Turner who,
Oh yeah.
his uprising and stuff like that, and it's just like, okay, I can respect that he wanted to do this, but like you said, is there another way that they could have went about it, or is that the only means to an end on that? And like I said, I don't think John Brown gets enough of, and like the gentleman you were just talking about, maybe they don't get enough of play to actually get a feel for it, because again, here, if you ask the right person, John Brown is this horrible person that should never be talked about again because he was treasonous and a murderer. But then again, there's a John Brown gun club that is a liberal gun club and everything else, and it's like, okay, so what do you do with that?
Yeah. You know what? And again, I don't have the good answers. However, I will say I am fascinated by those stories, and but also the thing is, like, anytime we turn a human being into a symbol, that is automatically a stew for fake history, as I call it, right?
Right.
So, like, and this is what happens with a lot of these figures, especially when they are deeply associated with a cause, is that, like, once they are gone, they become a symbol of something else. And that's the thing. Human beings aren't symbols as much as we turn them into them all the time.
Right.
As soon as you poke at them at all, you're like, oh, this is a person with all sorts of things going on. And yes, they were invested in this very important cause. And, and we can debate, like, how does one go about, like, creating like, emancipation, and then, like, again, I need to learn more about John Brown, but John Brown is also like someone who is, like, on the personal level, seems to have been, like, I don't know enough about him to speak confidently on this, but it's like
Right.
he seems to have been, like, I don't want to say emotionally disturbed, but just, like, emotionally, he just seemed to be, like, an extremely passionate person, to the point where, like, some people think that there may have been what we would now call mental illness in the mix. But I don't know enough about the situation to speak on that confidently. So caveat. That is just something I have heard.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm always fascinated in those people as people, and the thing we always need to sort of puncture a bit is, like, person as symbol, and
Yes.
we have just a habit of taking people and wanting them to be symbols, and it's never that's not my style. If I have anything, if there's any sort of, like, big thing I want people to take away from the project of my podcast, it's like, let's not turn human individuals into symbols.
Right.
We're going to again, and it's just what we do. But, like, we got to be critical of anyone that's a symbol,
Yeah, and that's the thing, and that's why I said, and I've brought it up to several different people on topics, just because I do think it needs to be broke down a little bit, and so it who knows? I will listen to Daniele's and go from there, because it is one of those. Because I remember in high school in the textbooks, you see the picture of him being brought out of Harper's Ferry by Robert E. Lee, and well, he was hung for treason, and you get those little blurbs, but you don't actually get, okay, well, what was going on? You know,
Yeah.
what's going on with that? But the last question I got for you,
Mhm.
and I just thought of it again off the top of my head, and then I'll let you out of here because we both kind of got to take off on this. Are you of the belief that, and if you got to give me a short answer, give me a short answer or whatever, the common saying is history is written by the victors. Do you, with all the stories that you've done and the research you've done, do you feel that that's a true statement, or do you think it's just something people with sour grapes make up when their version of things don't enter the conversation?
Mm. I think about that one a lot, to be honest with you. I think, okay, my first instinct is that history is not always written by the victors, but history is written by the writers.
Right, right.
So, I mean, maybe that sounds obvious, but like, I'm often shocked by how much historical information we get from people who are not necessarily history's winners. And so, like, you know, the very like obvious one that sometimes gets brought up is that like one of the first pieces of like proper history that we have in the Western tradition is Thucydides. And Thucydides is an Athenian writing about the Peloponnesian War, and Athens lost that war. So
Right.
the first piece of history we have, other than Herodotus, father of history, father of lies, but is is this an Athenian who technically lost the war, who now gets to tell the story of it, and that's how we mostly how we know about the Peloponnesian War. So even though the Spartans won, they did not record their history in the same way that the Athenians did. They weren't writers in the same way. And so we don't get their perspective in the same way. Now, you could make a bigger meta argument that, in a way, Athens was the big winner because that
Yeah.
culture was the culture that went on to be more influential because there was so much produced there. So maybe that's not the best example, but in a most very literal sense, like that's the first history we have is a history written by the losers.
Right.
Now, I understand the bigger point, though, is that there are lots of parts of our history where certain voices are just entirely left out. And so, you like, for instance, like let's take the Roman Empire, for example. If you are trying to get a sense of a culture that was conquered by the Romans, sometimes you can only see them through Roman eyes in the historical
Yeah.
sources. So, like, this is often the case when we talk about like the very early Germanic peoples or the Celts or some North African groups and things like that. We only kind of get to know them through the kind of the sort of dominant cultural lens that they interacted with.
Or another one of my favorite of your episodes was Boudica. That, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's also the case. And so like, also when you're looking at like, let's take the history of slavery as an example, getting the voices of enslaved people in any era that there were slaves is really, really hard to find. And so
Right.
historians that like try and like try and get like that perspective in history, the history of enslaved people, that's really hard because their voices very much were left out of history. And then there's the other thing of like once you start getting people who have been traditionally marginalized writing history, writing their own perspectives, getting their stuff down, that stuff is sometimes not always reprinted. That stuff is not always archived. That stuff is not always preserved. And so those voices sort of become harder to find. So is history always written by the victors? No. I'm going to say no. However, the victors have an ability. Here's the thing. The voice of the victor will always be there. That
Right.
voice is always going to be in the mix, no matter what. And then to get the other voices, like a good historian needs to be like actively searching for them. And then in some interesting situations, we do get the flip, right? And so, like for instance, I've just started doing a bunch of research into the Mongols.
Okay.
We do have, Mongol sources, but interestingly, most of them were preserved in Chinese. And so, the Mongols in many ways were one of history's great victors at a certain point, right? The empire forged by Genghis Khan is just this like incredible land empire that's never really been equaled. And yet we see the Mongols so often through the viewpoint of the people that they conquered, through the
Yeah.
viewpoint of the Khwarezmian Persian Empire, or from like the Abbasid Islamic Empire, or from the Russians, or from the various Chinese empires that they conquered, right? So it's interesting in that case where you're like, oh, the victors, they do have their own voice in there. Like there is this thing called the secret history of the Mongols that seems to preserve their perspective. But that's like one of many voices. And most of them are people that are like, oh no, like the Mongols are coming and we don't like them, So, which is actually rare in the history of conquerors, right? So like, most of the times when we're looking at like these great empires, most of what we get is from the perspective of the empire builders. And we have to search for the perspectives of the vanquished, let's say. For the Mongols,
Right.
it's the reverse. We get all these perspectives from the vanquished, and then you have to like kind of find that the so-called secret history of the Mongols, right, in the mix there. So that's there's an interesting one where it completely flips around,
Right. Well, I appreciate you stopping by and having this chat with me, Sebastian. Like I said, we went over the hour mark, but it was a great conversation and all that stuff. Can you tell the people where they can find you and what you're up to? Give us maybe a hint of what the next episode may be, or
Sure.
next series.
Sure. So, like I said, I just started doing some research into the Mongols. I'm hoping that that's going to be the next one. I'm going to have to make a real call on it kind of tomorrow, but keep an eye out for that. But you can find the podcast everywhere you get your podcasts. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, every podcast app. On YouTube, I'm making shorts out there on YouTube if people are curious about that. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Facebook. I'm on all the social media. Just search Our Fake History, and it's like we all share this history. It is our fake history. Just search that, and you will find me. Or just go to my website, ourfakehistory.com, and that'll take you to everything.
Go over, give him a follow, check him out. He, like I said, this was a episode a year and a half in making because we were trying to go back and forth and schedules just didn't match up. But I really look forward to this because I have listened for such a long time and I am a big history. There were two subjects in which ironically you were a teacher of that I was good at in school was English and history.
Right.
So this is a kind of a passion of mine too, but make sure you go over, listen to Our Fake History episodes every 2 weeks. He does take a break around the August-ish time period. So, but he tries to keep up with his episodes there. Go or follow us, Ohana_Packers on the tweet machine, Ohana Packers Edition everywhere else. Not on Blue Sky. I have a hard enough time keeping up on my own stuff on Blue Sky, but I have a personal one over on Blue Sky.
Yeah, there's too much. There's too much stuff, dude. I hear you. How many things we got to be
trying
on,
to do it with the podcast is even harder, because I got to post something on mine and then I got to post something on the podcast. It's a mess.
Sure, I feel you, man.
Go over. We are still doing the giveaway over on Facebook. We're trying to hit the 100 followers on Facebook. That way we can start doing, when we do live streams, we can live stream over there because they've got the 100 follower mark on that. Bunch of goodies from Hawaii because my co-host Mike is from Hawaii. So we've got a bunch of candies and stuff from there. I've got a couple autographed pictures from the Packers that I've put into the box too. And I think the box is slowly growing with stuff that I've been putting in there. Go or follow us on that. As Mike would say, go Pack Go, and
Packers fans out here to stay. Cheeseheads green and gold all day. Jordan Love lead us to the bay. Every game we find a way. Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for OPE, let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for OPE, you know. Green and gold gonna glow. Lambeau Field, our sacred ground. Feel the vibe, hear the sound. Packers fans so loud and proud. Jordan Love, he's wearing the crown. Lambeau Field, our sacred ground. Feel the vibe, hear the sound. Packers fans so loud and proud. Jordan Love, he's wearing the crown.